To receive any apologies for absence. Have you had any apologies?
None received, Chairman.
Okay. Minutes of the previous meeting of what it was. Is any comments on that? No, if I don't. Yeah, it was. Yeah, if I don't see any hands, I'll assume you accept it. If everybody's happy with that. Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, that's I'll sign those. Declaration of interest. To receive any declarations of any interest? No. Again, I see no indication. So. Okay, so and we move on to public question time. Have we any questions from the public, Neil?
None received, Chairman.
Okay, we move into members' question time then. Do we have any questions from members?
None received, Chairman.
Okay. Parish Town Council questions? Again,
none received.
Thank you. Okay, so then we move to a substantive item, which is the members' codes of conduct. Is this, I believe you wish to do this, Andrew, is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So, yeah, this is item 30 on tonight's agenda, starting on page 7. So I'm just going to introduce it for the committee. So the purpose of the report is to consider the Local Government Association's new Model Code of Conduct, which they published on the 23rd of December, so quite recently, and also consider the feedback from the local public consultation that the Borough Council held last autumn. So every council now is in, and every standards committee in councils is considering this new model code of conduct. So this evening I've got the code in front of you for your consideration. The recommendations that are for you to consider is to whether or not to adopt this new model code, either in its entirety or with amendments, or indeed whether you want to stay with the current code of conduct that the council has. It is a requirement that we do have a member code of conduct, so I think that's a key point. You're also being asked to consider about a regular review process for the code of conduct. This is one of the things that the LGA is recommending that all councils do, that they do periodically look at the code and check that it fit the purpose. And then thirdly, you're being asked to consider training programme, particularly with regard to new members. Obviously, we've got our new municipal year starting in May. So thinking about the sort of training that you'd like me to present to new councillors. So just in terms of sort of bringing out some of the key points, if I go to the main body of the report. So, and if I turn to paragraph 11 on page 9, I just talked there about the new model code and what's in it. So it continues to require the upholding of the 7 principles of public life. It contains 12 obligations with guidance. It sets out the legal requirements, as you'd expect. It defines a councillor as a member or co-opted member of a local authority. Importantly, and I think it does feel quite different to the current code, it's written in the first person. So I think I would hope that it's easier for people to get their heads around in the way that the LGA have presented it. It covers whether the question that we always ask ourselves when I receive a complaint, whether or not the councillor was acting in capacity as a councillor. And I think that there's some helpful pieces in the new code around that. And then it introduces some new concepts. So the concept of acting with civility, some definitions and clarity around bullying and harassment. Again, importantly, and we've got a separate item on tonight's agenda as well around the use of social media. So in the new code, it includes a reference to social media, but it says very little than that. It just refers to it, which is the reason why I brought a second item to you this evening around some local guidance in terms of the interpretation of the appropriate use of social media. It's got specific references to treating employees of the council, partners and volunteers for the local authority with respect, and under the obligation to comply with the Code of Conduct, to undertake Code of Conduct training, cooperate with any investigation, and perhaps we can pick up on that as well when we talk about my update on complaints. It has a piece in it about the level of registration of gifts and hospitality at £50, which is different than what we've got in our current local code of £25, and we did consult on that locally in the autumn. It brings in a new concept. I think quite a few people think this is already in the code, but it brings in this concept of bringing the council into disrepute. So that isn't in our current code, but that's in the new model. It codifies the position on declaration and participation in relation to personal interests. But there are some, so that's the sort of general introduction. There's some specific points for the committee's consideration. So I'm moving on to page 10 now. So firstly, social media, I've already touched on that. As I say, we've got a separate item on the agenda tonight. The gifts and hospitality question about whether or not you would be supportive of the LGA's model that refers to £50, dealing with disrespect. So I think this is an area worth some thought. In the model code, it advises councillors to report members of the public who are abusive, intimidatory or threatening to the local authority. But given the jurisdiction that the local authority has compared to the police, I think we need to give some consideration as to whether the word report should be amended to perhaps seek guidance from. That could be, for example, seeking guidance from myself as the monitoring officer. But I think that paragraph 17 is worth some reflection. Exempt information is the next point just to bring to your attention. So this has caused some complaints, Code of Conduct complaints historically, where there's been accusations that a member has breached the code by disclosing information that may have been considered to be confidential. And there's some helpful there's some guidance within the new model code around that. But in paragraph 21, because it is a very complex area, I mean, it's fortunate that we've got Jennifer Lee on the call as a solicitor tonight. If you've got any sort of detailed questions around how Part 2 exemptions of council reports work. I would suggest, as I am in paragraph 21 there, that you might wish to move away from explicitly what it says in the local code and adopt a more straightforward obligation on councillors when dealing with exempt and confidential information to seek advice from either myself or Jennifer as the deputy monitoring officer before releasing papers which you may consider to be confidential or other people may consider them to be confidential. I then move on to talk about the feedback from the local consultation that we did in August, and I think that is still pertinent. What I would say, and hopefully this is not too confusing, is that consultation was done specifically around the best practice, if you'll remember, from the Committee for Standards in Public Life. So there is a lot of crossover between what the Committee for Standards in Public Life recommended as best practice and the direction that the new model code of conduct from the LGA is moving us in, but they're not the same thing. So the government hasn't formally considered the recommendations from the Committee for Standards in Public Life yet. It may choose to do so at some point in the future. It may choose to amend legislation, particularly perhaps with regard to sanctions against councillors who are found to be in breach of a code of conduct. But that is separate, if that makes sense, from the specific item that we've got tonight, which is around the LGA's model code of conduct. At the top of page 12, I'm setting out the options that you've got in front of you in terms of how you might choose to take this forward. You don't need to decide everything this evening. so the timetable is very much sort of within the gift of the committee. And in terms of my final point, just other implications, towns and parishes have a choice as to whether or not to adopt the Borough Council's Code of Conduct, or indeed the model code produced by the National Association of Local Councils. So parishes and towns may choose to go down a slightly different route to what the Borough Council is doing. I'll pause there, Chair, and happy to take any questions or points of clarification.
I see, Prue, you have a question?
Yes, I have a sort of proposal as well. So I get everything on. So I would propose that we adopt this model constitution, but with a few changes. So if I just run through the ones, I agree with the social media being in. I think we should have that in. I think we should go with what came out of our local consultation on the gifts and hospitality and stick with our existing £25 and not the £50 that the LGA model has. And in the dealing with disrespect, my favoured word, rather than report, would be notify. That we should notify the council in person of the monitoring officer of any intimidatory behaviour. And I think that would cover the difficulty of saying report, because there's nothing you can do about report. The exempt information, this is a difficult area because, you know, there are some things which this council keeps confidential, which I don't believe would be confidential in some councils, or exempt rather. The classifications are complicated. I think it's probably fair enough to say if you have reason to believe this might be confidential or should be confidential or exempt. For example, if it's marked confidential on the email when it comes to you, you should ask the monitoring officer. I don't think that will get rid of it completely as an issue, but I think that's a reasonable way to proceed. Someone may choose not to if it's if they don't wish to, and they'll take the consequences of that, I think, if it does turn out to be confidential. But you may get things from elsewhere which are not council, which you don't know are council, and talk about them, and I don't think you can be reasonably expected to know that they're supposed to be confidential if they're not marked confidential. So there's always going to be bits around that don't quite work, but I think we should adopt that model with those changes or confirmations in some cases, but also we're being asked to set a review period, and I would say every 2 years, or when a change to it comes out from the LGA, whichever is the sooner. I don't think every year is necessary. I mean, we could do it every 3 years if you wanted. And finally, I think we should consider the best practice stuff when we know what the government has decided to do with it, so we don't lose that. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Prue. Gary Cowan?
Yeah, hang on, I'm being bothered by a cat at the moment. Prue picked up on one or two of the points that are interested me in. And confidential was one. The vast majority of emails officers sent to me say confidential, and they're clearly not confidential. So you can't have a system which says that an officer can decide that something is confidential, and when it comes to you, it's really not confidential. But if you're deemed to have abused the word confidential, you caused a problem for yourself. So I'm very wary of the use of the word confidential. In that context, if it's a genuine confidential or exempt, then fine. But so much stuff is marked that and is not. Bring the council into disrepute. Now, that's again is another very, very grey area. And it depends on one's interpretation of what that might be. I might say this council is a load of rubbish, so I'm deemed to have brought them into disrepute and then face the consequences. Now, that would be, I would say, unreasonable. So how you deal with that, I'm not too sure. As for options, option D, resolve to await the outcome of the government consideration of the Committee for Standards in Public Life. I'm more inclined towards going down that route, recognising that we retain the existing rules and regulations, and we do give our proper member training after May. That'll do for the moment.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I would just say, Gary, that anything we do, anything we write, is not going to is not going to contravene anybody's human rights. I mean, that's really important. I mean, say we've still signed up to the European Court of Human Rights, and I believe that the government are going to transfer the legislation across as it is. And of course, you have human rights, and everybody has human rights, in whether you're a councillor or not. So there's no way that they can be impinged by any standards regulations we come up with. Imogen.
Hi there. Hello.
Oh, yeah.
I kind of I certainly think that we should stay with the £25 limit, and I'm going to disagree with Prue because I think that this should be looked at annually, but it's likely that there will be reasons to look at it annually anyway. My sort of question is the part 2 elements of our meetings. How long are they confidential for? Is it 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? Has anybody got a legal, backing as to how long something stays confidential for, and particularly related to part 2 items? I also want to know: are we going to discuss the results of the consultation? Is that being discussed separately or now? I don't know, because there's points in there I think that we should look at. But apart from that, I think. Yeah, I'd like to talk about the bits from the consultation and other such things, but in terms of what we're talking about now and what the LGA have recommended, I'm largely in support of it. But the £50 limit should be 25, and I think we should review it annually. Okay, and I'd like to know about the part 2 confidentiality bits. I'll shut up now.
Would you like me to have a go at those questions, Chair?
Yes, please.
So the part 2, let me start, but I'll ask Jenny to chip in from a legal perspective here. So I think you'd probably expect me to say this, Imogen, but it depends on the particular nature of the part 2. There isn't going to be a hard and fast rule.
We need something a bit more concrete than that, I think.
Yeah, I guess we can probably give some more guidance in terms of if it is a part 2 exempt item, dependent on the sort of the category of the exemption, then what was the purpose, but how long. But let me just ask Jenny to comment further on that.
Yeah, I would agree with what you've just said, that it would depend, unfortunately, on the information that you're looking at. I'm happy to put together some guidance on that point if it would help, but I'm not sure that I could necessarily give a broad brush
approach. We need some guidance that we can put into our constitution in terms of okay, it's about financial stuff, then it's 7 years or something that.
Yeah,
because we can't keep it confidential forever. Let's put it that way. And there is a point when we should be able to do that.
Yeah, and certain things when they come into the public domain, depending on how they come into the public domain, they will change it. So I agree. I think I'd be happy to work with Andrew on that to put some guidance together.
Thank you.
And then
sorry, go on.
I was just going to say Imogen's second point around the consultation results. Yeah, I deliberately did put that into this evening's papers. Should you want to pick up any particular items from that would be relevant to the code in particular?
Well, I'd like to talk about the informal route, but I was just wondering if this is the time when we should talk about that. And also point 11 in there, as the clerk should be allowed to make complaints against the councillor if it cannot resolve it internally. I mean, I do agree that towns and parishes should take a lot of responsibility for their own conduct a bit, but there is a point where the clerk can't do that anymore. And I mean, if you just look at the handful thing, I mean, it's like at some point it obviously escalated. There's no way that they could have gone to the chair and complained about his behaviour in that instance. It had to be escalated. So the clerk does need that option, and that should be still there. Sorry.
Can I suggest both of those, that we don't lose them? The informal, I know that was a question that the committee asked for further consideration on. I think that's slightly different from the code of conduct that we're looking at, because the informal route is all around the process of resolving the complaints.
It's just mentioned in the feedback, and it's that rather than looking at this LGA bit and looking at it as a separate thing, I think the other things that come back we do need to look at.
Yeah, well, I'd certainly be happy to sort of put that onto a forward plan for this committee, so that's not lost at all.
I'd be happy with that. I think just don't lose it.
Sally.
Thank you. I appreciate some of mine might be a little repetitive, and actually just following on from that thing we've literally just talked about, I wanted to know where the complaints procedure is, because I sort of assumed it was in the code of conduct until I've reviewed it now, because obviously it's referred to in Appendix C on the model code of conduct as best practice. Where was it? Best practice 9? No. 11, sorry. So obviously it's being referred to in the code of conduct, which is why it went out in consultation. So I guess my question is where and therefore when are we going to review that? Because I think this is something I feel we should really tackle. Do you want to answer that one first?
Well, I'd suggest probably the next meeting of the committee we look at the, if you like, the other side of the coin of this code of conduct. So tonight is focusing on the model code. The next meeting should be that process of dealing with complaints.
Sounds good to me, thank you. And then the second one I had, it's a one of definitions. So there are 3 places, and I'm sorry, this is me. I apologise. I'm the picky pun. So page numbers of the agenda are pages 16, 33, and 63, where it defines what a co-opted member is, and they don't agree with each other. Specifically, pages 16 and 33 say that a co-opted member is, sorry, let me scroll to highlight the difference. So if you look at the middle of page 16, the definition of a co-opted member is a member of any committee or subcommittee of the authority, or is a member of and represents the authority, blah, blah, blah. And then separate to that, and who is entitled to vote on any question to be decided at any meeting of that committee or subcommittee. That is repeated, like the format is slightly different, but the context of they are A and B and they can vote. But then on page 63, which is ours, I think it's the social media document that we're proposing, the and has been absorbed into B. So I guess, I mean, obviously it does affect me being a non-voting co-opted member, but I spotted the difference there, and I was curious as to if we've got something wrong somewhere or if that just needs straightening out.
Okay, I think I'm just looking at the papers now. Page
16, smack bang in the middle.
Yeah, I've got that, which is in the LGA's model code.
Yep, 33, and that's actually the one which references the same definition of in the Localism Act as page 63, which is Annex A, Social Media Guidance for Councillors proposed. And then the third one is page 33, which is section 9.2.2.A of, I think, the current code.
Okay. Can I take that point away? I mean, it's a
Sure.
really good point. It's a really good helpful spot for us.
It kind of leapt out because it was obviously in 3 places at once.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And because 2 of them suggested that perhaps co-opted members should be voting members.
Yeah, no, it's a good spot. Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you, Sally.
My
Daniel.
pleasure.
Thank you. I'm sorry for being 1 or 2 minutes late to this meeting, by the way. When I was reading through the model code from the LGA, one thing caught my eye on is that they've got a table of what examples of disclosable pecuniary interests, and actually pecuniary interests, of course. It specifically cited any unpaid directorship as one of those, and I wonder if we thought through how this fits in with our system of having lots of members as non-executive directors of council-owned companies. Wonder if we needed to consider any amending wording on that, or whether we feel it's not an issue. That's one thing that caught my eye.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Daniel. Again, I'll have to take that away and look into that to make sure we've not got any conflicts there. But it's another good spot for us. Yeah,
it's just on first reading it maybe gave the impression that where you've, for instance, where at the full council the other week when you've got lots of interest being declared related to the statement of accounts, you could end up with plenty of members not being able to vote on that item.
Yeah, no, understood.
Abdul Loy.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, all. Page 10, item number 14. I just want a bit of a clarification between the two words, which is mentioned, claiming to act as a councillor and also giving the impression. So what's the definition of these two differential? Because I'm a bit confused on number 14. Andrew?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Loys. So, I mean, this is always, when I get a complaint in, this is always the sort of one of the first tests or one of the first questions that I ask myself in terms of the capacity question. And in social media, it's sometimes it's very clear that, you know, the person calls themselves councillor so and so on their Facebook page or on their Twitter account. In other cases, it's a sort of somewhat more grey area, and maybe it's a nuance here, and maybe this is something Jenny might be able to help me out with in terms of sort of trying to sort of clarify the difference here. But I think it's certainly that a point that we'd always look at in terms of that one of those sort of first tests. But maybe I could ask Jenny to add to that, please. You're on mute, Jenny.
Sorry, was this on the point 14? Did you say?
Yes, media activity.
Yeah. Was this the difference between claiming to act as a councillor and giving the impression?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really just it's sort of holding yourself out in certain situations where you're perhaps not expressly stating that you're acting as a councillor, but in all of the circumstances of whatever it is that you're doing gives the impression that you're acting in that capacity. That would be my take on it.
Okay.
I'm not sure we've helped you too much there, Councillor Loys, but I guess all I'd say is that we'd always look at the particular circumstances of the case. But I think what this new model code is pushing councils much more to is that if a councillor is using social media, then they need to take great care, because it's pretty clear that anything that you would do on social media, you are very likely to be considered to be in your capacity as a councillor. I mean, what the LGA guide, or the new model code, is trying to do is to take away as far as possible any ambiguity that might currently exist.
So it shows we need to be more trained what can be said and how we act. So it's quite a difficult one. Nowadays, yes. Everything's in media, but it depends how you're going to pick up and what kind of comes to you. So maybe in the future, yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
If you're not going to say it or do it in person, then don't do it on social media. It's as simple as that. You know, how you behave in person should be exactly how you behave in the social media world.
Yeah, I personally believe being a councillor isn't a hat you put on and take off. I think it's like a policeman. You're always on duty.
Pretty much, yeah.
Prue, your hand's up.
I think Graham had his hand up first, actually, if you want to take him first.
All right, Graham.
Thank you, Prue. Apart from Prue and Imogen saying that the threshold ought to be held at £25, I just wondered if there's a logic for the threshold being raised to 50. You know, I know it can be a sensitive issue for discussion and what have you, but I just wondered if there's a a reasoning behind it, because I haven't seen it yet.
I think the only reasoning that I could think of is that the £25 has been there for many years. So it's, I wouldn't call it inflation, but it's a sort of an updating, if you like, in terms of what would seem to be a reasonable level. But as you've seen from sort of the feedback, you know, there are a range of views as to the appropriate level. And I tend to perhaps agree with what other councillors have said on the call around £25 perhaps is where you want to leave it as a committee.
Yeah, I'm not trying to stir up, you know, unwarranted debate. I'm just trying to get my head around the logic as to how a 25 was come to. You know, I'm still counting myself as a new boy and learning.
Okay, Prue.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a sort of, whoops. Oh, am I on? Yes. Hooray. Sorry, I'm having trouble with bloody Teams. Not to give an example that's quite close to something that happened in the past, but let's say it's me. And it's to do with this acting as a councillor or claiming or whatever, and the conflict between that and bringing the council into disrepute. So suppose I got on a bus and I was really rude and aggressive to the bus driver, but I didn't say I'm a councillor, but everybody on the bus knew who I was. Would I get done under this code of conduct? Because we had a similar incident in the past where the person didn't get done on the basis that they were not acting in their capacity as a councillor, even though they hit somebody. It wasn't taken, they were acting their capacity as a councillor. I don't know how many people on the bus knew they were, but if I was there doing it and it was in Winnersh, everybody would know it was me and that I was a councillor. So how do you judge those kind of things under this regime?
Well, again, and this probably isn't a very helpful answer, but I think it's a case-by-case basis, and it depends on the particular circumstances of each case. And we'd look at, well, what evidence was there? You know, when you say everyone on the bus would know that you were a councillor, what evidence is there of that? But again, it's one of these sort of real grey areas, and it depends. Every case is different, has certain nuances to it.
And I suppose if somebody's clearly not acting on council business, and you know, public perception, just because perhaps somebody might know that somebody's a councillor, if they're clearly acting it's all very subjective, and I think that's not particularly helpful.
See, I think you should get done for that. If people,
yeah, I think it's. Can I just interrupt? I personally think it's the way you conduct yourself. It's not whether you're a councillor or not. The fact you are a councillor makes it means that you have to. You do have this standard. You do have this standards committee, and I think it's very much about acting as a reasonable person would act. And I think any councillor who strikes anybody or is abusive to anybody, I think they break that rule, personally. I just don't think you can take your hat off. I mean, it's not one of these things. You're a councillor 24 hours a day. I mean, if a resident rings me at 2 o'clock in the morning and says there's something dreadful going on outside my house, I don't say, well, actually, I'm only a councillor 9 to 5, so can you ring back tomorrow morning?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I would take that to sometimes look at if you're clearly acting in a personal capacity and perhaps, you know, having a conversation with somebody about something completely unconnected with nothing to do with the council, and they think that you've been rude to them in a way, then, you know, arguably that's not going to be council business completely outside of that. But I appreciate it's all going to be down to the circumstances of any particular matter. And
freedom of speech is protected, isn't it? I mean, by human rights, you have that freedom of speech. So, as far as I can understand it, there's nothing to stop you having a disagreement with somebody. It's just the way that you act. I mean, say if it gets to the point where it's fisticuffs, or it gets to the point where people around you think you're acting aggressive, and it's about conduct, surely.
So if you go down the pub, get drunk and start a fight, and get arrested, is that a matter for the council, or is that a matter for your personal conduct with the police?
Well, it's a matter for the police, but it also reflects badly on the council if you're scrapping on the pavement.
Let's not try it.
No,
Don't plan on trying it anytime soon.
This is all about being reasonable, isn't it? Acting as you would expect a reasonable person to act, and in a position of some authority. You represent your residents, and I'm sure your residents would expect you to act in a manner that's in keeping with that position. So anyway, Sally.
I just want to clarify, we don't actually have freedom of speech in the UK. We have freedom of expression subject to formalities, etc., under the law. It's a common misconception that that freedom of speech is a thing that allows us to say whatever we like. That's a US thing. We're not.
No, but we do have the protection of human rights, don't we?
Yes, subject to anything that is in law. So there are certain things we are not allowed to say. Which are hate speech, for example. So, yeah, just clarifying that one.
Okay. Do I see any more hands? Is there any more debate? Now, let's get to a point. What would you like to do, members? Would you like to adopt this and for Andrew to add the £25? And what was the other? There was another two issues that Imogen brought up?
They probably are a separate conversation than this.
Okay, so you would be quite happy then to go forward and accept this as it is the LGA's recommendation. You'd accept this on the basis with the reduction of £25,
with the assumption that we will look at the other issues that were raised in the consultation at the next meeting.
If I'm running this meeting, I'm quite happy with that. Okay.
The change, John, which was to change that word report members of the public to notify the council.
Okay. I think that's a good change, to be honest with you. So if I can ask, is everybody's in favour of the recommendations with the caveats of reporting rather or notifying and the £25? Is anybody against it? No? Everybody for it? Yeah. Seeing everybody's hands. Okay. Yep. That's carried, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Could you also ask the committee to whether they wanted to take up the proposal that Prue put forward around the review timing for looking at the model code, which was 2 years, but sooner if the LGA makes more changes?
I think the 2 years, unless there's changes made by the LGA or legislation changes, I would suggest that's acceptable. Would everybody support that?
I would be in favour of annually, but
yeah, but the chances are the legislation or the rules will change anyway. But I think to change it every single year, I'd much rather do it in line with what the LGA is recommending.
2 years feels adequate.
Yeah. Okay. If everybody's happy with that. There is nothing stopping you reviewing it at any stage. I mean, that's the important thing, Imogen. If there's a major change in legislation or rules or something like that, it would have to come back anyway. So there's nothing to stop you reviewing it at any time. I mean, we're just saying that they're here for 2 years when we would do a formal review. If everybody's happy with that, could you show, please? Yeah, thank you very much. That's carried as well, Andrew.
Thanks. And there is that third recommendation, Chair, just around training, which if you're going to recommend to Council the new model code, then we could base on training for new members and existing members on the new model code. So that's recommendation 3.
I believe that all members should be trained. Are you talking about extending it to all members or just members of this committee?
No, I'm thinking of all members, Chair.
Okay, that sounds like a reasonable idea.
Are we talking about town and parish councils as well?
I wasn't thinking about town and parishes at this stage, no, because as I said in my introduction, towns and parishes may choose a different route for themselves, potentially, in terms of what code they adopt.
So if they adopt this code of conduct, will there be training for them? Or I guess that's their problem, I suppose. But
yeah, I certainly work closely with the clerks, so that I'm happy to talk to them over the next few months in terms of what support we could give them.
Okay.
Okay. So again, are we all content with that? Everybody in favour?
John, I am. My hand has disappeared, so I'll speak.
Okay. Thank you, Gary. Did you want to say anything or just voting?
Voting.
Okay, thank you. That's carried. Thank you very much. Okay, so if we move on to the next item, which is update of complaints. Again, it's up to you to do this, Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So since the last report to the committee back in October, there's been 5 new complaints, and that does include the complaint that you've got in the detail appendix of the complaint from the 2nd of August, which was previously missed off the reporting. So in Appendix A, and I'll come to that in a minute, you've got a summary of the complaints and the latest position on each, and I've got some verbal updates as to where I am with those. I do flag up in the report, but I've already mentioned it, around social media being one of the patterns and trends that we've noticed over recent years, which is why the next item on the agenda is specifically recommending some guidance on social media. Just the final 3 paragraphs on page 51, I'm not going to read those out, but happy to take any sort of questions that anybody's got around the process that the Constitution requires me to undertake. I can see Sally's hand up there. I'm very happy to answer any questions you've got around the process of how complaints are dealt with, but I did, for members' benefit, did try to sort of set that out at the bottom of page 51. If I could move now to the detail of Appendix A, and I just wanted to fill in some of the gaps and some of the updates on there. So the first one at the top of page 54. So this is a town and parish complaint. So this particular complaint is due to go to a hearings panel. It was scheduled for very early in January, but because of the issues that we needed to resolve following the last meeting on the 11th of January, that hearing was postponed. We are actively looking for a new date for that. I'm hopeful that we can complete that this month. But that will be, and maybe this is part of Councillor Gurney's question, that will be the one hearings panel that will have convened in certainly over the last 2 years, and that will be a subcommittee of the Standards Committee when that sits. If I move on to the bottom of page 54, the complaint that was received on the 23rd of July, that complaint, as you can see, went to an investigation. We had a very thorough investigation conducted on that to make sure that the complaint was understood, both from the complainant's point of view and from the councillor who was the subject member. That investigation was completed. I consulted with the vice chair and the independent person at the end of last week on the outcome of that, and that complaint has now been resolved, and there was no breach of the code of conduct. If I move on to page 55, the complaint at the 25th of November, That's currently at the investigation stage. The investigation hasn't yet been concluded, but as soon as it does, and we're seeking as far as we possibly can do at the moment to expedite these, then I will be making a decision on that. I would hope quite shortly. And then we've got, just on the bottom of page 55 and the top of page 56, we've got 2 town and parish council complaints, which, as it says, are ongoing, which still need to be dealt with. I would make the point, and I know some councillors have made the point with these reports previously, that I'm very conscious of the need, both from the council's point of view and from the subject member's point of view, to expedite these complaints as quickly as possible. And this isn't intended as an excuse. COVID has slowed things down somewhat with different priorities. There have also been issues at my end in terms of capacity to manage the process as quickly as we would like to, but there's also been issues with particular complaints where it has been difficult to get responses from people involved in those complaints. So there's been a raft of reasons as to the situation that I'm presenting to you this evening. What I would say is I'd be looking early in the new municipal year to come back with some very specific proposals in terms of things like SLAs, being clearer about managing that time, the elapsed time from start to finish, if you like, with regard to individual complaints. So we make that as short as possible and we get to a clear outcome on those complaints as quickly as we possibly can do. But very happy to take any questions that any members have got.
Sally.
Right button, thank you. Sorry, it was always going to be me, wasn't it? Referring to the last 3 paragraphs on page 51, I really appreciate the summary. I am going to ask anyway, is there, I guess the reassurance needs to be that there were no scenarios reviewed where at the time the chairman or vice chairman who was involved in the discussion was also a member of the executive and therefore unconstitutional, because I feel that those ones should be re-reviewed by a constitutionally correct panel, so that, not because I believe that there's going to be any significant difference, but because I believe that if any committee is going to be doing it correctly and according to our standards, it should be this one. So I guess that's really my question, is were any of those decisions made with people who were constitutionally questionable at the time?
Well, if I could respond to that, Chair, what I tried to set out is the process whereby it is myself as the monitoring officer who actually takes the decision. So in terms of decision making, that's what has transpired during the period from May 2019. The Constitution requires me to consult with the chair, or in the absence of a chair, the vice chair, and an independent person. And I did that with all of those complaints during the period. Now, I would always listen to both the councillor and the independent person. What I would say, in particular, the independent person and their view on all the complaints that come in. And I think that particular safeguard has worked really well in terms of any, I guess what you're saying, Councillor Gurney, any undue concerns of inappropriate influence or anything of that nature. All the complaints were considered during that period, both at the time but also post the 11th of January, the last meeting of the committee. We do have, I believe he's on the call, I saw him earlier, but one of our independent persons is actually in the meeting tonight. I wouldn't ask him to comment unless he wanted to comment at all in any way, but certainly from my point of view, I'm very clear that the Constitution has been upheld appropriately even in the circumstances that were highlighted to the committee on the 11th of January.
Okay. Imogen.
Hi everybody. I did a little bit of research in a similar sort of vein and looked at what the other councils in our area do, and none of them, I mean, I couldn't find one for Reading, but West Berkshire, Bracknell, Windsor and Maidenhead, they don't have any councillor being consulted on in terms of whether to progress or something. They only consult with the independent persons, and I'd like to understand why we are different. Andrew, you probably know Windsor and Maidenhead quite well, but...
Well, all I can say on that is that's the local process that I don't have the date, but at some point in the past when councils considered the process, that's the process that council agreed.
I'd like to know why we are different, because if we had done that, then Sally wouldn't be asking this question. You know, it would have been, okay, we've all done it with the independent person, decided whether to proceed with something or not. And I did make a complaint, and I wasn't happy with how it was dealt with during that period. So I've got a bit of a personal thing with that that's going on as well. But I'd like to understand why we are different, why we're not the same as the other councils and just have independent persons reviewing these.
What I could suggest, Chair, is that might be an issue that the Standards Committee at a future meeting might wish to consider, in terms of we've already said, Imogen, that we're going to look at that point about the informal route and whether or not the committee is happy with continuing with that or would like to put something different in place. And similarly, the issue in terms of who the monitoring officer consults with, if indeed they consult with anybody, whether as a committee you'd be happy to continue with that or you'd like to see something different. And I could do some further benchmarking with other authorities. I'm sure if I looked, we would find many other authorities who've got the same process that Wokingham has, but as you've identified, Imogen, there are authorities that do it differently and don't require the monitoring officer to consult with anybody.
Yeah, there are differences between us and other councils. If you just look at Bracknell don't have any questions at any of their council meetings. That's just the way. Well, you laugh.
That's their way of doing things. But in this instance, they do consult with an independent person, and that I agree. You should consult with somebody, but I'm just not in agreement with it should be a councillor.
Well, that would have to come back to this committee, and for this committee to make a case on that, and for this committee to decide whether or not they were happy to change the rules. It's what the rules are at the moment, though. Nobody's arguing that they're right or wrong. I'm not. I'm just saying at the moment they are the current rules, and if you want to change them, you would have to bring it back to this meeting and no doubt argue your case. Prue.
Well, thank you, John. Come on, camera. Right. This is a standards committee. I'm looking at this kind of like a declaration of interest. Declarations of interest are not just about whether you actually have an interest, but whether anybody might perceive that you have. And I think this is not dissimilar. That everything might be fine, you know. I'm not going to impugn anybody's reputation by saying they've unduly influenced. I'm pretty sure that's fairly unlikely. But somebody looking at this from outside is going to think that the temptation of somebody who's elected as a politician to interfere in a complaint for political reasons, either to defend somebody or to attack somebody, sometimes people will give in to that temptation. That's what a member of the public would think. And so I would be very keen to have us look at this when we look at the best practice recommendations, which we've already said we're going to put on the agenda, that whether we should have the independent person or an independent person rather than any politician. And I would say that if it's my party or your party or any other party, I think it's just sensible to get rid of something which makes us look not that straightforward. So that would be my view on that. But I have to say I am slightly uncomfortable. I share with Sally a slight discomfort about the fact that having been seen to operate unconstitutionally, even if nothing is actually wrong with the decisions, it feels wrong to me that we don't revisit those things. I'm not sure I'm going to win the day on that, but I would have preferred it if the automatic reaction had been, we go back and look at everything we did while we were unconstitutional, and I would have preferred that route. Okay, but if we can at least look at it for the future, I would be grateful.
Well, your comments are noted, Prue. We've obviously taken advice. All of us took advice from our legal people, including Andrew and Susan. And if they'd asked us to have done anything different, we would have done it. I think that the past is the past. Unless you're Doctor Who, you ain't going to change it. So I would suggest that your suggestion going forward may be something that we do. I'm not quite sure whether or not any politician wants to be involved in sitting in judgment, or at least consulting in judgment over another politician. So you may be right, but it's not for tonight, obviously. Okay. Do I see any more questions? Are you happy with that, Prue?
Am I happy? No. Am I resigned to it? Yes.
Okay. All right. Sally, I see your hand is up again. Did you wish to ask another question?
Yeah. Sorry, just in follow up to that, I don't feel that the past is the past and we can't change it is a good enough reason. I'm exactly the same as Prue. She said exactly the same words as I was thinking. Possibly if we had consulted with a PR person as well as legal, they would have said the same. So where legal might say you don't need to, PR might say, yeah, but you might want to. So as I said, it's not about, I'm not expecting the decisions to change. It's really about looking absolutely 100% squeaky clean to people who are not part of the borough, because ultimately they're the ones to whom we report. So yeah, legal might say, yeah, you don't need to, but I'm not sure public relations would have agreed. That's all.
Yeah, I'm constantly told that there are no thing as public relations in councils.
Well, that's probably not their problem.
when we try to get them to,
there needs to be.
There may be, but when we try to get them to write newsletters, we are told quite clearly these are for information and not for PR. So there's a slight difference here with the councils and outside companies. Where
I understand that. I'm not actually suggesting we should get PR. What I'm saying is that the decision we've made may be 100% legal. It just doesn't necessarily look good. That's all.
Okay, I accept what you've said, and we wouldn't have done it if we'd have known the truth. It was a genuine mistake.
I completely support that. I'm just saying I think our follow-up reaction, possibly we could have done something that maybe
maybe if we end up at the next meeting talking about removing that the politician, maybe something good comes out of something that wasn't good.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you. Okay, right, let's just move on from there. Good discussion. Anybody got anything to say about the updates and complaints, feedback? Any of the specific?
Yeah. Well, in my digging around, I did find that Newbury had done a lovely little flowchart of the complaints process, and I was wondering if we could do something similar. And it also had a resolution of 20 days, and it had some key dates on it, which would be good targets.
I was just about to come on to that. Obviously, I'm trying to be independent here, but I do believe that if we, going forward, as I say, if we're involved in this, we do need some SLAs, and those SLAs need to be fairly rigorously enforced. It's unreasonable that any member should wait more than 6 months to know whether or not they're going to have a complaint found for them or against them. And my discussions around this was we should be looking to resolve as many as we can within 8 weeks.
That's reasonable. Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
I mean, that's how long you get for a planning permission. So, I mean, why it should take us any longer
Well,
to decide.
if it goes longer, then at least it needs to be a
Well,
really good reason. Yes.
And it needs to be brought back as an exception rather than just a report.
Yes.
Okay. So that I was going to say that. Sally, did you wish to say something again? No, your hand gone down. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so if you move on to section
sorry, I did actually want to say something. I did fail to unmute myself. My apologies.
Okay, right.
A number of these appear to be around bullying or harassment related on social media. I appreciate that we're going to be doing some new training anyway, but I wonder if there needs to be some sort of process of maybe annual training, a bit like, speeding training things when you're caught on a camera. Maybe there just needs to be a sort of a refresher for anybody who's coming up with, someone's is a bullying or harassment complaint. Maybe we should consider doing a refresher for them.
What do you suggest, Sally? If they get caught 3 times, they get disqualified.
Sure, sounds good to me. In theory, if they get caught 3 times and found guilty, that's going to happen anyway, because the electorate will see it and go, yeah, no.
Oh, well.
Well, you'd think, maybe not.
I wouldn't always rely on that. But
no.
But I do think, I mean, there are a number of issues we need to look at. And I suggest that not just with training, but with social media, we need to look at interpretations. I mean, I think you have to ask yourself, is somebody saying something on social media that they wouldn't stand in the street and shout? Would we consider that to be unacceptable? I don't know. I mean, say it's a whole new world, and I guess these rules will have to evolve. But as I go back again to human rights, and I do accept what you said about free speech, Sally, but you're allowed to have your own opinion and express those opinions as long as they don't break the laws, as far as I understand.
Freedom of speech, not freedom from consequences. Absolutely. It's not just social media, though. There's a number of things that obviously it's slightly worrying, because complaints about behaviour in meetings, disrespectful, blah blah blah, etc. There's just a number of kind of watchwords that make us think perhaps we're all losing our ability to socialise quite so well with all this extended lockdown.
Yeah, quite possibly. And it's a lot easier, isn't it, if you're sitting behind your computer desk, your computer keyboard, saying nasty things about people that you wouldn't say to their face. Right, okay. So we move on to the next one, which is the social media guidance. Did you want to take that, Andrew?
Yeah, just very briefly, Chair. So this is agenda item 32. So that starts on page 57. So as we've said a few times already this evening, we've acknowledged that having some guidance, some official guidance that we'd propose to put into the Constitution alongside the Code of Conduct would be helpful for members in terms of clarity. So this is what you've got this evening in front of you. You're being asked to approve the social media guidance and recommend it to full council. The guidance itself is sort of an amalgamation of sort of best practice that I've seen from other councils, which is Annex or Appendix A. You've then got the second appendix, which is some guidance, more high level, I would suggest guidance from the LGA around social media. I guess what I would say is that this is obviously an evolving subject, changing all the time. Social media is such a fast moving world, so it's probably something that we wouldn't want to just approve once and stick it on the shelf for 10 years. There's something about really keeping this up to date should you approve it tonight, and having a look at that sort of quite regularly. So I'd suggest that you'd want to consider it, a review of it in line with that same sort of timescale that you set with regard to the Code of Conduct itself. But I'm happy to take any questions. I won't say anything more than that at this stage, because we've all got our own personal views about social media, and I think I'm just really keen to hear what the committee thinks about the draft that you've got in front of you this evening.
Sally.
I actually want to say something really positive. Obviously, I had strong opinions when we first talked about this, mainly because I work in an industry in which using social media is part of my job. And some of the early discussions potentially could have impacted that. I just want to say I'm really impressed with how this has been written. I think it's the right level of guidance versus rules. I think it is permissive enough that it's not going to impact people who also work with social media for work. So I just want to say this. I think it's a really good job and well done.
Thank you, Sally. Well, not for me, but thank you from Andrew. Is there anybody else who's got any questions? Prue.
Oops. Oh, botheration. No, I think I tend to agree with Sally. One of my other roles in life is to deal with disciplinary issues on behalf of the Liberal Democrats. Joy. Don't laugh. A lot of our complaints are to do with behaviour on social media, and I'm thinking of nicking part of this if it doesn't object to particularly and the LGA part, the advice bit at the end, to send round to people who as best practice, because people get themselves into trouble so easily by doing something late at night, or when they're a bit cross about something else, or it escalates during the day and somebody's annoyed them, and it hangs around your neck for years and years and years, and you can't get rid of it, and it's a disaster. So I thought this was quite good, and it won't stop everything, but it's a positive step, I thought.
Thank you, Prue. A bottle of Chardonnay at 12 o'clock at night and
Yep.
social media don't actually make a good bedfellas.
No, indeed.
Can I just say, I mean, I think it's good. We're not trying to design something that stops people having their say. This isn't about trying to censor people. This is just about making sure that the conduct of the people that are using it is moderated in such a way that they get their point across without getting, as Prue rightly says, into trouble. So I'm quite happy with it. Is there anybody else got anything you wish to say about this? No. So would you like to go for a vote that we accept this as a starting point for social media? So everybody show who's content, please. Yep, that's a full house. Thank you, everybody. All right, we move on to the next subject. That was easy. Right. Annual report. Attached to this is an annual report that we have to report to council. Has anybody got any observations they'd like to make? Abdul.
Sorry, John, my hands wasn't up.
Okay, right.
Oh, it's not.
Gary?
Yeah, well written, John. Nothing more to say, and I'll support it.
Thank you very much. Abdul, did you wish to speak?
No.
Okay, all right, thank you. Prue?
Nothing to do with the quality of writing it, but I'm afraid I'm not going to support it. I know that's a very rare thing, and it probably won't make any difference to anything, but I do feel that what happened isn't on the 11th of January isn't properly acknowledged in the report, and therefore I just can't support it. I don't want to sort of open old wounds and go over and spend ages arguing about it. I just I'm not going to support it, and that's not a particularly having a go at anybody. I just think it's just I don't feel comfortable, and I'm sorry, and I can't. That's
Okay,
it.
that's fine. Thank you, Prue. Imogen?
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with Prue there. It doesn't talk about what happened in January, and I think that there needed to be a little bit of something said about that, and because it was quite a
Page
critical
73,
thing that happened.
guys.
Page 73. Just looking.
The very end of the item, underneath the list of people, there is a long paragraph about what happened. It's fairly clinical, but it does exist in some extent. It's not completely absent.
It doesn't exist at all. I just
Yeah.
Imogen didn't seem to think it was mentioned, so I thought I'd just make sure she was aware.
It is, but very, very lightly, and I felt it deserved a bit more than that.
Do you intend to vote against it or abstain?
I intend to vote against it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there any more questions? Okay. All right, if there's no more on that, any other items that anybody wants to bring up? No. Sally.
Sorry. It's just one more time. A little while ago, or quite a long while ago, I asked if there was if we had anybody apply to become. I know we're not looking for any more independent persons, but if we did have somebody apply to become an independent person, would it be considered? Because obviously at the moment we've got three upstanding gentlemen. It might be quite nice to get a bit more diversity amongst our independent persons. I'm just wondering if that is still our position, that we would be open if anybody did contact Democratic Services to apply.
Andrew, up to you. I've got no. You can have 100 of them if you want.
Yeah, all I'd say is I think we're quite blessed as a council having the 3 independent persons that we've got in terms of, so we don't have any gaps. Yeah, I think it's a fair point that Sally raises in terms of I wouldn't want to actively seek out people to fill these positions at the moment, given where we are, but it's something again for the future for us to sort of think about how we communicate that opportunity, certainly if an opportunity did arise in the future.
So is that a no, we wouldn't accept potential applicants at the current point in time?
I guess, yeah, in a yes/no sense, no, we wouldn't accept any because we haven't got any gaps at the moment.
Seems like a shame, but okay. Today would have been a good day to advertise it, with it being International Women's Day, so might have had a slight better chance of catching people's attention was all.
Yeah,
it's fine.
My wife has reminded me, Sally. Is there anybody else for anything else? Okay, if that's it, well, thank you everybody. Thank you members and independent members. Excellent meeting. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you, John. Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.